In from Koboko, the women are not embracing the recruitment exercise, well, because it's a rigorous training, and would love to shun that. Of course, the PR that has been levied onto these LDUs wouldn't compel women to join. Women are very peaceful people, but then when they hear the group they are joining is engaged in indiscriminate shooting of Ugandans, they want to join. Yes, because of the bad PR with this group of local defense unit personnel who actually killed 12 people, yes, before COVID-19 claimed the first life in this country. July 22nd, LDUs had killed 12 Ugandans while enforcing standard operating procedures in that regard. That's the latest coming in on Morning at NTV. Well, on the flip side, we want to talk about the shrinking civic space, the shackles put on the democratic governance facilities, on the NGOs within this country, the civil society organizations. We do know that on Friday, as of last week, yes, 54 NGOs were indefinitely suspended in that regard by the National NGO Bureau. That's the latest coming in. We also do know that government became so serious on these civil society organizations as of December last year. Yes, we saw Simon Osborne, the EU advisor on elections. Yes, he was deported. Marco Desward wanted to return to Uganda. Marco Desward, he is the DGF's head of election programming. Yes, he was meant to return to the country around July. They also stopped him from coming by immigration. So there's been a concerted effort to actually clamp down on civil society, ranging from the year 2000. It got worse in 2006. It got even worse in 2017 when we were debating the age limit removal. And now in 2020, before the 2021 election, government made sure that those who were actually putting a microscope on its activities were no longer there. But why? Sarah is here to expand more on that. If civil society organizations are doing the most for the vote, as you know, championing the voice of the voiceless, helping vulnerable people, women and girls. You saw so many groups engaged in election monitoring, helping women engage or participate in the elections, activities you wouldn't call as terrorist in any way. But then government is coming out to say civil society organizations are being funded to undermine this government, to subvert the will of the government. What do you make of all these allegations? Is it just the rules to clamp down on civil society?
Well, good morning, viewers.
Yes,
I think since we are on it too, I can put off my mask.
Indeed.
But to the people out there, please, COVID is still with us. Always wear your mask in public.
I like the fact that you're not politicizing COVID. You're not saying COVID is not here. Government is trying to use COVID-19 to clamp down on civil society. That's what Kizza Besigye said yesterday.
Well, yes. On events happening and the civic space in the country, indeed in the last elections, we had the least number of election observers, both local and international. Especially
the foreign ones.
Yes, yeah, and the foreign ones that were accredited, they could not, some of them could not.
So you realize there's a space that needs to be filled, and then you step up.
Yes,
that's where trouble started.
The conditions that, you know, were given to them. As for civil society organizations, civil society work is provided for in the Constitution.
All right.
Under the democratic principles.
Indeed.
Of the national objectives and directives of state policy and Article 38 of the Constitution. They provide that one is civil society organization shall retain autonomy as to their set objectives. So it means that volunteering citizens determine what they want to do and how they want to do it, but within the laws, the legal framework. Article 38 provides that every citizen shall participate in their governance at all levels, either individually or through civic organizations. So anybody saying that civil society work is subversive does not understand the Constitution. When it comes to regulation, which is under the NGO Act. Article 3 of the NGO Act, no, Section 3 of the NGO Act provides the functions of the Bureau. And among them, the Bureau is supposed to create an enabling environment for NGOs to operate. They should empower them, ensure their partnerships with government, ensure that they have capacity to operate, including, you know, compliance with the law. When you go under Article 7, you know, Section 7 of the same Act, the Bureau does not have mandate to halt any work of an organization. The Bureau, under Section 33, can only revoke work of the organization if an organization is operating contrary to their set objectives. Only. The same section provides for due process. The organizations must be informed, must be heard, and even to issue a suspension of a permit, you must give them notice 30 days before you make that suspension. Oh, this was not done. Under the same law, it provides that there must be a board where civil society organizations are represented by 2 people. This board does not exist. The same law provides for an adjudication committee, which would then look into the work and actions of the Secretariat. The adjudication committee does not exist, and CSOs are supposed to be represented on these committees. So the Bureau is functioning when it's not fully constituted. It does not have a board, it does not have an adjudication committee. It just has a Secretariat that is acting arbitrarily to the laws.
So if Ugandans had the power, they would cancel the work of the National NGO Bureau in that regard, because they're using the same reasons. They use the same reasons to shut down the Democratic Governance Facility. They said, we do not have representation as the government of Uganda on the board of DGF. We need at least 3 representatives in that regard. We also do not have any Ugandans on the biggest board of this DGF representing Ugandans as a whole.
Yes, and civil society organizations are not represented on committees that they are supposed to be represented to enable the full functioning of the Bureau.
And even 2 weeks before this closure on Friday last week, we had this conversation via our webinar, and we're talking about the shrinking civic space in Uganda. It seems like, Sarah Bireta, you had anticipated all this fallout to take center stage, especially after the election. They clamped down itself.
You know, out of the actions that happened in the during elections, where civil society organizations were closed over allegations of funding terrorism,
Yes.
you know, the government came up, said they had security information that leading civil society organizations, they closed the biggest networks. The NGO Forum, this is our umbrella organization, as all NGOs in Uganda.
Indeed.
The Uganda Women's Network, the umbrella organization of all women organizations in Uganda. It's important to note that women are 51% of the population in Uganda.
Could that be the reason why we saw few women actually engage in the politics that took center stage during that period? The fact that the stakeholders would have acquainted the ladies or women with this information were largely under shackles by the government.
Organizations, yes, that were affected were supposed to train and empower women candidates, among other the work they were supposed to do under civic education. So when you attack a women organization, women don't like violence. Women don't like to operate in things that have controversy.
Indeed.
So that, of course, scared many women that were supposed to participate, both as candidates and voters, and we had low women voter turnout.
Almost 8 million did not show up.
Yes. Yeah, so that has an effect. But when a government, I think government should act responsibly. When you allege that an organization is funding terrorism, and you have evidence, and you've closed accounts of these organizations, if indeed your intention is not just to close the operations of these organizations without following the laws, why don't you arrest and prosecute people funding terrorism? Because if any Ugandan here is engaged in terrorism and you leave them walking freely on the streets, you are endangering the citizens. So what kind of information did security have to allege that NGOs were engaged in funding terrorism in this country? And why were no arrests effected?
They always single out Nicholas Opio, Chapter 4, but this was unrelated to terrorism. These were money laundering charges for which they didn't have enough evidence.
Happened, I think, like 2 months after the closure of these NGOs. And they said Nicholas Opio was engaged in money laundering. Well, the state has failed to prosecute that case. What are they waiting for? Nicholas Opio has been appearing in court, and the prosecution is just asking for adjournments. Please prosecute that case and adduce the evidence that you alleged you had at the time of his arrest.
So this is the rules to put shackles on civil society or NGOs, because we have information coming in from the experts who are saying government is using the National NGO Forum to execute its political and administrative work. Is it true?
The Bureau.
The Bureau itself.
The Bureau, yes, because we have the NGO Bureau and then the National NGO Forum, which is an NGO.
Yes, the National NGO Bureau. Do you think it's being used to execute the work of the government, the political and administrative work of the government?
Well, I had an opportunity of listening to the executive director of the Bureau.
Yes.
He claims that he's doing his work of monitoring, of regulating and ensuring compliance within the sector.
Indeed.
But he has not followed the same act that establishes his existence. The act provides for due process, the act provides for written notes, the act provides for organizations to be heard, and the act also specifies limitations on his mandate, including Section 33, which says he has no power to revoke or hold work of any. Section 7, he has no power to hold operations of any organization. Where an organization is operating under an expired permit, the law provides for a fine for community-based organizations, a fine for national NGOs of 10 currency points. It does not say close the organization. So is he following the law or not? I think that's something that he must explain. The law says here, the organizations, let them be heard. He did not. Most of the organizations saw themselves in the media that they have been suspended, they've been halted. There was selective hearing of these organizations. Some were contacted, some were never contacted. And some received the letter after the announcement of the suspension. So I think it's up to the Bureau to explain what powers they are using, first of all, because they are contradicting the law that establishes them, and two, whether they are following the rules of natural justice in their regulation. And I think there's also a big misunderstanding in this country about regulation and prohibition. Many people think that once you are a regulator, your duty is to prohibit work of the sector, instead of enabling, and the law is very clear, create an enabling environment for the sector to flourish. So where is this enabling environment that the Bureau is creating?
When it comes to freedoms, the Uganda London House Index actually ranks Uganda as actually unsafe, partially free, and repressed.
Yes.
That's what they say. Expound more on that. Well, unsafe, partially free, and repressed. But of course the government will deny all this.
Let's look at basic civil and political liberties in this country. First of all, what civil liberties do Ugandan citizens enjoy? Article 29 of the Constitution is very clear. Citizens can protest, citizens can demonstrate, citizens can petition.
That was the contradiction with
I have seen several times, especially Makerere University students, being arrested as they take a petition to Parliament, walking with their gowns, after notice, walking to Parliament to take a presentation about issues affecting them in a university. They are all arrested, beaten, clobbered. They go missing for 2 to 3 weeks. The same applies to Chambogo. So what kind of civil liberties exist in this country?
Well, of course, they were using the Public Order Management Act at the time, which was actually part of its expunged at some point.
Of course, the police always uses unconstitutional and arbitrary powers with their high-handedness. And the court has ruled in several instances. In the Muwanga Chuvumbi case, in the NGOs case challenging Public Order Management Act, and in several individual petitions that have been in court under Article 50 of the Constitution, under the Human Rights Enforcement Act. The police acts illegally and arbitrarily in this country.
Is it the main reason why the government is actually so concerned about the work of civil society? When these reports come out, when it comes to human rights, police is on the top.
Yes.
Human rights violator. UPDF, number 2. Human rights violator.
We have spent 2 years.
Is that the reason why they are so focused?
We have also spent 2 years without a functional human rights commission in this country. So it's not just
no
civil
investigations
society.
could take place. Yes.
Of course, they cannot produce any report. They cannot investigate any human rights violations. And that was intentional, so that we do not have a human rights commission at the time of high electoral violence in this country during elections.
You think they just left that position vacant after the death of Medi Kagwa?
I think didn't we have people to replace Medi Kagwa, qualified to replace Medi Kagwa? Didn't we have people to replace others that had retired from Human Rights Commission?
Is that the reason why?
Don't we have qualified
Yes.
Ugandans? I know that there are some names before Parliament for people will appear tomorrow for vetting. But we've spent 2 years without a functional Human Rights Commission.
Could that also be the reason why the IGG's office was largely vacant?
Well,
because corruption took center stage during this election, campaign financing
COVID.
and so forth,
And COVID.
accountability issues.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I don't know, but we have qualified Ugandans. Once any Ugandan leaves an office, especially constitutionally established offices, there is no need to spend 2 years without, for example, chairman, Uganda Human Rights Commission. We have competent Ugandans in this country.
Do you think this is a gradual plan, Sarah Birete, to actually torpedo civic space in Uganda? Enter the electoral period without the IGG in office, enter the electoral period without Uganda Human Rights Commission constitutionally working, and then remove these local NGOs that are putting a microscope on your work and then stop the foreigners from coming in?
Yes, and put the elections in charge of the military, because who was in charge of elections in this country?
The military. But the government will tell you the Electoral Commission.
Of course. At one time we had that the Electoral Commission chair had no TV. I think if we had an extension of about 2 months, maybe the chair would have said that he's blind and deaf, because really I think he was overwhelmed. But the truth remains that we do not have civil and political liberties in this country. Or if there is a semblance, maybe to note that out of Article 29 of the Constitution, only the freedoms that are fully enjoyed is freedom of worship. The rest are tramped upon by the security forces in this country.
That is another, you said freedom of worship is largely existent, but then even faith-based organizations
I know
are
in court.
indefinitely suspended.
No, I know they are in court.
On Friday?
Yes, there are two
Yes.
election high court suits over closure of churches.
Even just NGOs that are operating faith-based. There were some of the group that was shut down on Friday. Then we're wondering, how are they engaged in terrorism if these are religious organizations?
Well,
And then Kizza Besigye told me yesterday that it's because these people, when they get maybe on the pulpits or when they interact with the people, they actually, talk about the ills that are happening in the country. And that's why government is adamant to let these NGOs that are faith-based continue with their work, and even the churches from reopening, because that's where people go to, and then when the leaders meet them, they talk about the ills that have been brought about by the central government and what is happening, the current reality.
yes, true, because these organizations are closer to the people. I think there's a deliberate intention to make sure that there is no meaningful citizens' participation in their governance in this country at several fronts, curtailing the work of political parties, curtailing the work of civil society organizations, curtailing the work of faith-based groups that are not singing the songs the regime wants to hear. And media, media, I am reliably informed that most media houses actually operate on temporary licenses.
Is that so?
Yes, temporary licenses that can be revoked without following the due process. Then we saw the brutality against media during elections. Media was clobbered all over the country, especially those that were covering opposition candidates, including the beating as Honorable Chagulanyi was taking a petition to the UNHCR over election violence and abductions of his supporters.
Let's talk about the fate of the Democratic Governance Facility. Will it be reopened? Do you feel like, or have any hope that government might lift this suspension? They've been talking, and there are some recommendations that were reached. The Daily Monitor was lucky to see some of those. Government requested for a 3-member representation, at least 3 people on the part of government representing on the board of DGF. And they also came up with a resolution whereby each member can have at least a single vote. And this vote, if it's coming from the government, they can say, no, there's a big issue here that we can't handle as DGF. Let's take it to a ministerial level, and the minister handles it. Is this the influence that government is talking about, getting involved in the machinations of DGF? If money is coming in from a third donor that is not part of the 8 EU countries, government would like to know how much has come in and from whom. Such issues.
Well, you know, I read the recommendations in the Daily Monitor article.
Yes.
Some of them are surprising. But what is important for the viewers to note is the fact that many countries that have partnerships with the government of Uganda, their partnership does not stop with the regime in power. It's a partnership with the people of Uganda. And that's why you see like many donated agencies like from the people of America. You know, this is money from citizens of other countries to benefit citizens of Uganda. Citizens of Uganda do not only work through government. And most of these agreements, 75% of funding goes to government, 25% of funding goes to non-state actors, including civil society and private sector. But when government says that, for example, because the DGF is a composition of EU countries. Yes. So if you say that EU countries are engaged in subversive activities in Uganda, how come when they are funding roads, when they are funding medicine in our hospitals, when they are funding oxygen and testing and treatment of COVID patients, that is not subversive? How come when they give money to an organization to sensitize people on their civic rights, then that becomes subversive? Where do we draw the line? We saw the list of DGF funding. Half of the entities were government entities, actually. Parliament and several organizations that work on governance-related work. Were these governance entities engaged in subversive activities? No. So who is engaged in subversive activities? And what subversive activities are they doing? And why don't you arrest and prosecute them? What stops government from arresting and prosecuting the people engaged in subversive activities? Because
DGF has a war chest of about 500 billion Uganda shillings, and most of this money is going to the ministries and the agencies and the departments.
Of
so
government.
Yes, of government.
So were these government entities engaged in subversive activities? Because they are also, their activities were also suspended. I think those are the questions we should be interrogating. Was Parliament engaged in subversive activities? Was the Electoral Commission engaged in subversive activities? Was Uganda, because these are some of the beneficiaries, was Uganda Human Rights Commission engaged in subversive activities?
I think what
were the districts being funded engaged in subversive activities?
Here's what government is saying. They're saying we are receiving money from DGF and we are using it to help Ugandans. But then the money going to these other NGOs, we do not know what they are using it for. Is it to help Ugandans or to subvert the will of the government? That's what they are saying. And that's why we are here.
How do NGOs operate in Uganda? NGOs, majority of them are registered with the Registration Bureau Services. That is a government entity.
Indeed.
They file annual returns. NGOs funding comes through banks. Banks are supervised by Bank of Uganda.
Yes.
All transactions are available to government entities. Where is money coming from? Where is it going? When we are expecting funding, we write to banks. I have had a discussion with this group. This is the agreement we have reached, and I am expecting this kind of funds from this entity. This is information we take to our banks. Banks are accountable. They are being supervised. Government has access. The Financial Intelligence Agency has access to all this information. So if I'm receiving money from DGF, and the purpose is clear, and the DGF publishes agreements on the website, their partners on the website, work their funding on the website. If you suspect that organization X is engaged in subversive activities, why don't you have a conversation with this organization? Why don't you then deal with these individual organizations? Why do you have to close the facility if you think that your intention is not to close and block citizens' participation in their governance, which is unconstitutional? So the actions of government against the DGF, it has nothing to do with subversive activities.
And this doesn't date back to only December of 2020. It goes all the way to the year 2000, when the retired Kano Kizza Besigye took center stage in Uganda's politics. 2006, with the removal of term limits, I remember civil society made a lot of noise. And then we go to the removal of age limit in 2017. There was also too much noise from civil society. And then 2020, here we are. But how can all these civil society organizations push back against this shrinking civic space, Sarah?
We also have upcoming constitution amendments. The Cabinet approved a decision on compulsory acquisition of land by government. So the proposal to amend Article 26 of the Constitution was reapproved by Cabinet. But also there are talks to amend the presidential system in this country back to a parliamentary system. So I think
Godbert Mushabe actually mentioned that, and I thought he was joking.
No. These are plans that are happening.
A parliamentary system of governance. I couldn't have seen it as feasible back in the day when I spoke to him in February. He mentioned it, yes. But right now, so his organization is part of those NGOs that were
so we have
suspended.
These two major and contentious constitution amendments that the government is planning to have in these 5 years. So part of the plan could be, you know, block the sector so that it's not organized to engage or to enable citizens engage in debates
and raise a voice over this issue. I see.
The same attacks that happened during elections to make sure that nobody does meaningful civic education or election observation in 2021 elections. So it could be the same intention to block citizens' participation in these constitution amendments. We've already seen the debates on Maryland, change of Maryland system, very contentious. So then maybe they don't want, like they've done before. In 2017, during the debate on age limit, NGOs were attacked.
Indeed.
Yes, NGOs were attacked, especially those that were enabling citizens' participation.
And even individuals like myself. I spent a couple of days in jail over the age limit debate.
What were you doing?
There was a concerted effort to stop each and everyone from talking about age limit. So I had to spend a few days there, more than 48 hours. But here we are. Go ahead, Sarah.
What was the charge?
There was no charge. There was no statement. They let me go after a few days.
Those are the arbitrary
after Parliament
acts.
passed the resolution.
Those are the arbitrary acts, the high-handedness.
No one is spared.
Yes.
But how can civil society push back against this shrinking civic space?
Well, we have analyzed the laws. We have had a quick analysis of the decisions of the Bureau vis-a-vis the law. There is a need to seek interpretation on what is an NGO. Because we have two laws, the Companies Act of 2012 and the NGO Act of 2016. We have two laws doing dual registration, dual monitoring, and dual, you know, dual regulation of the sector. NGOs report, those that are registered with the Bureau, report to two regulatory agencies, URSB and the NGO, the Bureau itself. So you file annual returns in two government agencies. You regularly report to two government agencies on the same work. And you are registered by two government agencies. So, and this costs money, costs time. It's a repetition of regulation. So we have double regulation as a sector. Whereas the law, the NGO Act, says that organizations who want to be referred to as NGOs must register with the Bureau. When you go under Section 3 of the regulations, 2017, and made after the Bureau, it makes it mandatory for anybody doing non-profit work. So we have ambiguous definition. We have this definition like the same with the Pornography Act that has just, Anti-Pornography Act, that has just been nullified by the Constitutional Court. So that same kind of definition in the NGO Act needs interpretation. What is an NGO? What defines an NGO? And who qualifies to be under the NGO Act? Because the NGO Bureau has gone outside to regulate organizations whom they claim are engaged in not-for-profit work. I don't know whether that is true or not. But if you have a think tank that is registered as a company limited by guarantee. Because when you are registered as a company limited by guarantee, it means that the promoters of that organization are not tagging money as their contribution to this organization. They are only tagging their integrity and their professions as promoters of this organization. There is no money involved. So if there is no money involved in this registration, and these are think tanks doing research, doing policy analysis, publicizing their findings. And when they are calling a workshop to publicize their findings, and then you say you are engaged in not-for-profit work. So how are they supposed to operate? So who qualifies to be a company limited by guarantee in this country, and those who qualifies to be an NGO, and where do we draw a line? But there is also need for putting the Bureau on it, that they need for a due process in their regulation. And the Bureau is set up to enable the sector and not to disable and disempower the sector like they are doing.
Of course, 2 to 3 weeks ago, before the NGO Bureau could actually shut down many of these NGOs, the 54 NGOs, we had already had discussion.
Yes.
We had already talked about what an NGO is, what's the mandate of the NGOs, and so forth. Simply wanted to talk to the public to iron out some of the misinformation coming in from government, who have labeled civil society organizations as terrorist organizations. But then during that conversation, you divulged some details. You did mention that it's not even easy to start up an NGO. It will take you 3 years, even before the donors give you money. They first study you for some 3 years. It's not as instantaneous as government believes. So let's first break down what civil society does, who they are, and then we talk about the modalities when it comes to the funding.
Civil society basically works to enable the vulnerable, the poor, and generally the citizens to participate in the affairs of their governance. So when it comes to an NGO, really, many people have started NGOs. It's easier to register, but they've ended. They've never gone into operations because it's not easy. For the first 3 years, the promoters of an NGO have to fund it because there is no partner or donor who will pay attention to you without a 3-year activity report and 3-year audited reports. So the work you're doing is self-funded by the volunteers that formed this organization. When you get funding, it comes with conditions. First of all, the funding must be in line with your set objectives.
Yes.
But also the funding has conditions. I am funding remote work as a volunteer, maybe paying them to enable them move, transport and pay their costs.
Yes.
But also this is the work that I'm interested in supporting. Those are the partnerships you have, and they have conditions, including reporting guidelines, which are normally quarterly.
Yes.
Away from that, you must make audit reports. You must report now to the Financial Intelligence Authority. You must engage with the URA. You must engage with the NSSF. All these are government-set institutions. So you do accountability at all these several levels. And now we have dual reporting of the regulators, URSB and NGO Bureau.
Indeed.
So you are doing all this work, including KCC, where we pay service tax.
NSSF too.
Yes, but beyond that, you have a board that oversees the governance of an NGO. So you have a secretariat and a board that does oversight. So you are accountable at this level, including the beneficiaries
Sarah,
that
here is
engage in your
the biggest
activities.
contradiction, before you even forget. President Museveni comes out over the weekend. You remember this very well. And he's like, I don't like the way my military officers have been behaving during this COVID-19 pandemic, wreaking havoc on the human rights of my citizens in this country who voted for me overwhelmingly. I do not like that. That was his statement. But then Friday, then we see the people who are jeered or engaged in work that largely stops human rights violations from taking center stage being clobbered with this indefinite suspension. Double standards?
Maybe it was preemptive speech. Preemptive speech on what the government is planning to do. Because if you close civic participation in this country, if you disable citizens from participating in their governance, what human rights are you enabling? Citizen participation is part of the fundamental human rights and freedoms, with the International Bill of Rights, with our Chapter 4 of the Constitution.
But this is the biggest contradiction.
Yes.
I don't know if the viewer does understand it. You are in the village, then the village chief comes and says, no, I do not like the way my clan leaders have been handling the situation within the area. They're beating up people. So then later on, you get the volunteers who are helping stop your land chiefs from beating people, and then you say, I'm stopping your work.
But also it's important to note that in that presidential speech, which sounded very good to everybody's ears,
it did.
He did not announce any tangible actions. The only action he announced was that he's going now himself to sensitize the forces on human rights. The work of sensitization on human rights is a mandate of the Human Rights Commission under Article 4 of the Constitution. The president should have named, he had clips of some of the clips of human rights violations. He should have named the officers that have violated human rights in this country. He should have suspended them. He should have subjected them to hearings and then final dismissal if he was serious about what he was saying. So you cannot make a beautiful speech with no actions as a head of state. No.
Is this central government setting a stage for 2026? That's the information that I've been receiving on Morning at NTV. They do not want whatever happened in 2020 in the run-up to the 2021 election to take center stage again in 2025 or when we have the election in 2026. That's why we are seeing the clampdown on civil society. Could that be the reason?
Well, we have had many...
Anybody who could help Kyagulanyi moving forward?
Who helped him come up? You know, citizens have rights to contest for all offices, including the final...
During the campaigns, we did see some civil society organizations, some NGOs actually siding the or towing the political line. They would say, okay, for us, we are now Kyagulanyi supporters because this is the movement of the young people and so forth. You would really see most of the NGOs. You'd really see some talking points that we needed a leader, a new leader who is young, who is energetic, and you'd really see that their pointers were directed to a particular side. So that's why we are saying...
As organizations or as individuals?
As organizations.
Okay, I did not see that. Because if you go under Article 48 of the NGO Act, an organization cannot fund or support a particular side of the political. But individuals are free because they have their rights as citizens. And that's why I was asking that question.
It also took
if you go under Article 16 of the Political Parties and Organizations Act, the only people prohibited from taking partisan positions in this country and openly engaging in campaigns are the members of the UPDF, members of the police force, and members of the prisons force, and staff who work for organizations that are fully owned by government. Those are prohibited. NGO leaders do not belong to that category that I've mentioned, that is captured, prohibited by the law. So NGO leaders as individuals, they are free to engage in the politics of their country. But organizations are not. You cannot say as CCG, we are sponsoring President Museveni in this campaign. No. But as Sarah, you can say, I support this candidate, depending on what you're doing. Yes.
What about court redress? Is that an avenue through which civil society could push back against this shrinking civic space? Can you run to court to actually fight this latest directive coming in from the National NGO Bureau? Even though what we saw were delays when you were trying to fight POMA, the Public Order Management Act, it took you 6 years. Well, government appealed and it could take 6 more years. That is 12 in total. Imagine being in court for 12 years. So what are the options in court right now?
Well, we make use of Article 50 of the Constitution in several violations of human rights. And some organizations, I think, have already instructed lawyers to go to court. We have analyzed the law vis-a-vis the actions of the Bureau, and we have realized several glaring gaps in the conduct of the Bureau. We intend to have dialogue with them on their actions, and if dialogue fails, then we shall go to court to seek redress on where they are acting outside the law and they are usurping the mandate that they do not possess. They are using mandate that they do not possess, including halting you know, permits, revoking permits, where the law provides for an option of a fine. For you as a head of a bureau, you have created your own law and you have not provided a fine. You've not heard from all affected organizations. You've not issued notice of suspension 30 days before the suspension is announced. So we are going to engage, put them on notice where they have violated the law, hoping that they can recorrect their actions. If they fail, then we shall seek redress.
You know how this is going to end if it takes 6 more years, Sarah Birete? Yes, this court case might be out by 2027. That is after the election. Don't you see the plan by the government?
I know normally some cases delay in courts of law, but some are hard and determined. Some are technically delayed.
All right.
So that the decision comes when it has it has been overtaken by events. We all know these gymnastics.
Indeed.
But we have to keep pushing on. There's one information I wanted to clarify on the role of NGOs.
Yes.
NGOs work in most times, especially where vulnerable people are concerned, to make sure that the rich and powerful do not have capacity to buy off the poor and vulnerable, and then the poor and vulnerable are not desperate to sell themselves.
And
so we create a balance at that level. But also there has been propaganda that NGOs are enemies, foreign agents or foreign whatever agenda. If the same partners that fund government of Uganda are the same partners that fund NGOs, so where does this enemy context come from?
Sarah Birete, the Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. Thank you very much for having made the time to speak to us. Yes.
Thank you.
We should set up our webinar next week and we'll also continue with these operations.
We shall engage with the shrinking civic space issues.
And of course, you're still watching Morning at NTV. Let's take a breather. We'll return shortly with Stephen Imbide. He's on the ground. Keep it here.